When I thought about this first today, I came down the kitchen this morning and my daughter Lucy was there. And I looked at her and I said, Luce, you know what? And she said, what? I said, you're breathing. She goes, yeah. I said, your heart's beating. She goes, yeah. I said, you're standing upright. She goes, so what? I said, do you know what that means? She goes, what? I said, it means that you have awakened to another day. You know what that means? That you've got a day, and all this day you're going to apply your biggest assets into something in those moments that make up this day. And she's looking at me at this point, like rolling her eyes, as she always does when I give her these life lessons. But some part of her's gotta like it, right? But I said, Luce, what are you going to do with these moments you got today that comes from your heart or your soul or your passions or your mind or your strength? You get to write that whole day. You're the artist that gets to do that. And she goes, great, Dad. And then she walked off and got her waffle. But it did start to get me thinking about all of us. And that's what we have. When we're born into this world, we basically have a couple of things. We have our time and we have our energy. Everybody's born with that. And by time, I mean, you're going to have a certain number of moments, and those moments are going to turn to hours. Those hours are going to turn to days, which turns into weeks, which turns into months, which turns into years, which turns into decades, which turn into, you know, a life. And how we invest moments are basically the building block that we'll look back and say, that was a good day. That was a good month. That was a good year. That was a good season. That was a good decade. But you don't do a decade. You don't do a life. You do moments. And so that kind of brings up the question, how do we spend our moments? Well, that got me thinking. And since Lucy wasn't helping out any, I had to think about this on my own. And one of the things that I thought of that I want you to think about is something that I have found very, 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 very helpful. And helpful because I'm not really, the overstructured, hyper anal OCD, left brain, everything in a list, color coded underwear in the right drawer, organized, structured kind of person. I'm a little bit more on the other side of the world. And so things that help me, tools that help me, principles that help me think in terms of sequence and linear paths and how things get done and all that. I've always found those to be very, very helpful because you're going to write a book, it's it's got to be down a path. If you're going to get a degree, it's got to be down a path. If you're going to save money, it's got to be down a path. If you're going to invest money, it's got to be down a path. If you're going to build a business, and so I had to learn tools to do that. And they've really saved my life. And I'm going to, remind you of a couple you probably already know. And one of them is called, I call it, I don't know where I first heard this, and it's an old story, but it's called the big rocks. Put the big rocks in first. Now, what does that mean? Well, I think it comes from a story about a professor in a college classroom or a high school classroom. And he's got a pile of, big rocks on his desk, and then he's got this box of like sand, right, or bb's or little rocks or pebbles. And he basically puts the question out there, so let's fill up this jar with all of these pebbles, with all these rocks. And so what he does is he takes the pebbles and little rocks and he pours them into the jar, and it fills it up, pretty far here. And then you reach over and starts getting the bigger, puts the first big rock in, second big rock in, third, and the third one won't quite go in because now the jar is full. And he's got a couple of 3 or 4 big rocks or 2 or 3 big rocks still sitting over there. And he said, all right, I want you guys to watch this. So then he takes it and he turns it upside down and he puts everything back on the table. And then he takes the big rocks and he puts those in first and they all go in the jar. And then he takes the sand, he pours it in, and it fills up the crevices, and there may be a little left over. So, what's the lesson? In your life, everything's not the same. Everything doesn't have equal weight. Everything doesn't have equal value. Everything doesn't have equal consequences. There are big rocks in life, and there are certain things that matter more than anything. There's a story in the New Testament about two sisters, Mary and Martha, two women who are, I guess Jesus had dropped by and they're going to have a party or something in the evening. And Mary's sitting there just talking to him, hanging out. And Martha is scurrying around trying to get stuff ready and, preparing and all this kind of stuff. And she gets really, really stressed out and exasperated. And she runs over and she says, Lord, don't you even care that I'm having to do all this stuff? And she's just sitting there griping about her sister, Mary. I think it's her sister. Was it her sister? I think her friend, sister. And he turns to Mark and says, hey, Mary, get off your butt and go help your sister or friend. Is it sister or friend? Somebody text me when the answer. I'm pretty sure it's her sister. Instead of saying, go help, he turns to Martha. And here's what he said. He says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things. But really, and here's the kicker, he said, only a few things are important. And he said, really only one, or most of all one, or the most one. And he said, Mary's chosen the good part that won't be taken away from her. Now, what did Mary choose? She chose the relationship first. And we know from all those commandments, he said, what are the greatest two commandments? Well, our relationship with God, our relationship with each other. Everything boils down to those two things. Let me tell you something. Your most important relationships are the big rocks. And when we think about how we spend our time and energy, we got to put the big rocks in first. And some of those relationships are also relationships that relate to getting things done, like relationships with your business partners or work or teammates or whatever. Get the big rocks in first. And included in the big rocks are the activities that build those things. And I'll stop my rant by giving you a couple of examples. When the girls were little, I had two daughters, Olivia and Lucy. And when they were little, I'm a psychologist, and I just, I know that when a little girl is wanting mommy or wanting daddy, and that drive in them for relationship and connection, it's going to go and it's going to get wired and programmed to some kind of person on the other end. I did not want that little wiring of them when they wanted to connect with me to get wired to a vacuum, meaning somebody that's not available, somebody's detached, somebody doesn't move towards them, because then they're going to have that wiring and then they're going to go find men like that. And I didn't want that. And so, oh my gosh, it was that hard sometimes. Come in, from 80 hours of whatever and walk in. And I mean, how much easier is it a lot of times just to go unplug, say, hey, I need my cave. I'll see y'all later. But I just didn't want that in their heads. So one of the things I did was when they were little, I decided I was going to do parent toddler preschool with them. I think they called it preschool, but it's when they were really, really little. And once a week on Wednesday mornings, I'd go with each of them for this 2-hour block, and you play games, and then you talk to the parents in a group. And anyway, and it was on Wednesday morning, and it would be always invariably right in the middle of something. There's no way I can leave the office right now. And one day I skipped it because something was urgent, a Martha thing. And I thought, she'll never know. She doesn't even know we're going. I mean, she can't even tell time. I'll take her next week. And then the next week, something came up, and I said, oh, I can't go. And then I realized, wait a minute. There's always going to be something. There's always going to be something that's urgent, that's important, or whatever. But dadgummit, if I don't put the big rock in first, it's going to be left over. It's not going to happen. And so I just made this, if the house isn't burning down, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I'm not scheduling anything on Wednesday morning, that 2 hour block. I'm going to sing Five Little Monkeys Jumping on the Bed. And sometimes, whether it's date night with your spouse, whether it's writing that 250 words or 1,000 words that you got to write a day if you're going to write a book, or making 10 sales calls, the big rocks have to go in first. That's called first, prior, before. It's where we get our word priority. So figure out your big rocks, put them in your schedule first. You'll have enough room for the sand.